Morning.
Good morning.
Good morning. All right, it is 8:30 and we're going to begin. I'd like to say welcome to the Northwest Illinois Regional Volunteerism Conference. My name is Pam Clark-Reidenbach and I am the Executive Director of NICNE, the Northern Illinois Center for Nonprofit Excellence. NICNE is the host for today's event, but it would not be possible without the program. This program would not be possible without the amazing people that work on as volunteers on our Exchange on Volunteerism, and they helped put the conference together. So for those of you that are on that committee, I want to raise your hand, give you a shout out, say thank you for your help in putting this session together. I'd also like to thank our sponsors for today's event, Serve Illinois, AJ Gallagher and Company, and Imperial Punch. We've gone to a full year online interactive format due to COVID. Each month, we have a 1-hour presentation followed by a group discussion that's moderated by our friends Carrie Acevedo and Martisha Brown. Today's session is titled, Your Trash, What It Means, Admitting It's True, and Doing Something About It. And if that isn't a catchy title, right? It certainly got my attention. And today's speaker is Todd Wellman. Todd is the Public Allies Milwaukee Program Director. He's an experienced director, creative and technical writer, faculty member, and trainer. He's a 2-time Public Allies AmeriCorps alumnus, former Wisconsin State Commission AmeriCorps representative, and 2019 Lambda Literary Fellow. Todd will build on the pre-conference reflection question. Can you say, we're interested in people belonging, not just feeling welcome? I cannot wait to hear more. Please help me to welcome Todd Wellman.
Hey, thank you so much, Pam. I really appreciate it. And a little screen sharing here as well. And hopefully everyone now. I just want to thank a couple people too. Billy Callahan has been extremely helpful in all of Northern Illinois Center for Nonprofit Excellence for support and communications. If you want to read more about them, that website is, of course, if you're not familiar. You're welcome to share today's content. Do so though with some attribution. Some people are big Twitter fans, and I know if you are, what's his Twitter handle? It's right there at Todd Wee. And I generally just for joining me on my search for means. It's something I've heard for quite a while, especially in the work I do. And I've been thinking for a long time, if I had to explain that to someone other than kind of sort of getting what it means nowadays, what would I say? And if they wanted to know, okay, so what if that is true? What do you do? So that's where this presentation came out of. I also want to acknowledge that in my experience, this is the kind of topic that may lead to a couple things, including clenched teeth, tight shoulders, rising breath, throughout the conversation. So I invite you, as you're able, right now, if you'd like to make some space in your jaw, move it around, drop your shoulders, and breathe from your stomach throughout the session. And whenever you need a break, that you can think of those 3 things: jaw, shoulders, and stomach. If you're feeling stressed out at all, it's good to do anyway throughout your day, especially if you're like me, always sitting down at a computer these days, alone in my basement. Some of the agenda for today, It's in the 3 parts that were just mentioned. We're going to talk about what I've learned about what your trash means. Then we're going to go into what it could mean to admit that it's true. And then, assuming we admit it's true, we'll go into some tools or some processes for what we could do about it. Here are my hopes for you today. I hope you leave today's presentation and the follow-up time, which I love the design of this. If you're like me, having gone to many,
No, let me get, so I get in line to get the oil change.
You are often left thinking, I really, really wish I had an interactive reflection time with other people right after that speaker. So the design here is inherent in that, and I applaud the designers for that. And I hope you leave the two parts having reflected on some examples of the kind of insights you may receive when you learn the quote unquote your trash about you or your organization, having heard and or practiced ways to name when you or your organization has been quote unquote trash, and having considered potential ways to address what I've been thinking of as quote unquote trashness. There is a guiding worksheet that shared that if you're like me and you really enjoy a guiding worksheet, the link is here, and someone on the team is going to reshare that in the chat box. I believe it may be Billy or one of the team members. I already see a number of people join. I'm looking at a different screen quickly. Again, that worksheet's available if you do enjoy it for you to share with your team. There's just a note on there to please keep a little bit of it intact, including the attribution that's on there. And most of the presentation today is going to be very present-y just because there is that big open time at the end to do some discussion, and there is the worksheet. Usually I do much more interaction, but one of the team members today is watching the chat box just in case we do need to address something. And just a little background again about where this all arose from for me. I would say for at least a decade, I've heard or read the term "your trash." You might want to be thinking about, is this term new for you, or is this something you've heard? I would bet if you haven't quite heard it expressed that way, you may have heard other versions of it, like "their trash," or after today, you might get a sense of the meaning behind some other phrases that you've heard a different version. And I've heard it specifically used for this reason, as a reason people don't want to volunteer at or otherwise be involved with a person or place. I've heard it even more in the last 5 years. And again, I'm lumping together a lot of different phrases because they're trash, you're trash, etc. And that was quite the insight for me when I was putting this together, really saying, when do people say it? Like, what is one of the primary impetuses? And it really is said when someone gives it as a generalized reason where they don't want to be involved, they don't want to volunteer, they don't want to be associated. So generally, when I hear it, it's not just an offhand comment. It is somehow it's insider baseball language so that people understand that it's reason enough to say no to people. And this presentation, since I was wondering what was behind the phrase, what I did is I started listening to people. I started asking people, what does this phrase mean to you? When do you use it? And people said it. And at least in my work at Public Eyes Milwaukee and in my volunteer life and in a lot of the things I do, I have heard this phrase quite a bit, and I've read it quite a bit too on social media. And finally, a small attribution here. From what I've learned in my life is due to the thoughts of Black women, queer people, people with disabilities, people with first languages other than English, and many others who often don't get credit for their expertise. Their expertise builds the world around us, and then other people like me sometimes, say as a white person, gets to use what I learned from a Black person in a presentation. And so I can't trace all of that knowledge, of course, but I do want to recognize that that is true. And this is where we start on the worksheet. You'll notice on the left-hand side, if there's a worksheet portion that ever comes up, there's a note. So at this point, if you're in the worksheet, you're using it, we're on 2A. And I want to start with definitions. I've witnessed long ago that it can be important to take a pause and not assume we all sort of know each portion of what something means. And so that term, your trash, I really wanted to break it down, and I wrote different versions of this, and for longer and longer. And if you write definitions or glossaries or help people understand what terms mean, you know, sometimes shorter is better. And then once you get too long, you actually start getting into qualifications and examples. So this definition might look a little long, but it's much shorter than the original ones I started with. And this is it's almost more of a translation, I would say, that I've been working with. For those looking to involve others, such as through volunteerism, someone or an organization is trash when they, consciously or not, affirm a traditionally empowered group of people, even if they believe they're open to all. The trash creates bad stress and other negative effects for traditionally non-empowered groups of people. And I'm going to read that definition again, just because I have met some learners who appreciate reading something on the screen and then hearing something a second time, just so they can really process for a moment. So the definition and the translation I've been working with for your trash to get it sort of outside of that insider baseball language. For those looking to involve others, such as through volunteerism, someone or an organization is trash when they, consciously or not, a fully empowered group of people, even if they believe they're open to all. The trash creates bad stress and other negative effects for traditionally non-empowered groups of people. And the reason that definition really hits me is it admits that there is some sort of preference going on, and that things I heard from my friends, from colleagues, from the people I work with and volunteer with, is that preferencing was such a big part of their judgment for why not to be involved in the volunteerism, in the invitation, with the person that has sent out that invitation. So sometimes people think, okay, we got the definition, that general definition, but give me some general examples, like, so I can kind of get into this. So, you know, I went through and I thought of, okay, let me think of that preferencing, let me think of groups. So I went up to the generalized identity level. And there is a note here, if the term cis is new to you, I linked to Merriam-Webster, and that's also in the worksheet, just in case you need that. But at the generalized identity level, using that definition, so say you invited people who use wheelchairs to a volunteering event. But those people, the people who use wheelchairs, see that you affirm able-bodied persons through your event. The people who use wheelchairs may say, you're trash. Another example, you invite Black people, particularly, to a volunteering event, but the Black people show up and see that you affirm white people, you know, through your actions, through your design. Black people may say, you're trash. So those are some simple examples, again, at the generalized identity level. And then the question might come up, okay, how about just another, like a quick example, something to help me kind of get on to the definitional part of this. Dr. Alex G, alexg.com, I was in a session with him once, and he was once asked, how do you like to handle email on vacation? And he surprised the person asking him, the workplace asking, they don't. And he didn't out loud say you're trash, but what he was saying was that the organization asking him, how do you like to handle email on vacation, even aware that checking email on vacation, control accepted concept. It was promoting people who aren't stressed out about email, who have access to the email. It was promoting a very particular culture and expectation over the health of some other type of person. So in the end, that organization, again, you could say, he said, you're trash, even though that wasn't the direct words. And then wait a second, a moment ago, Todd, you said, what are some of the bad effects? You were talking about these bad effects. So the question, what are some of the bad effects for traditionally non-empowered people? So this is what I've heard when I went through mental health support training recently, when I've talked to our members, when I've done coaching. These are the things I've seen or been told about. When you affirm one group of persons over another, when a place is trash, some of the bad effects are the pressures of not being an authentic self on the group that you've invited. There can be physical violence. There can be a continued lack of control in one's own community. There can be a drop in self-esteem or consistency of high cortisol levels. Police can be called for perfectly okay behavior. People can be called lazy or they can start believing they live in this false lazy narrative that people just need to try harder. And that's, the reason they're in their situation or their current circumstance is that they just don't try. They can have fewer healthy attachment relationships. And they can adopt the belief that they're supposed to be in a needy position, that somehow they're the needy person and someone else is the helper. So that's the first part. That's the definitional part. I do want to pause for a moment, check in with Billy, just to see if there's any comments or anything to address in the chat room before I get on to the second part here.
No comments at this time.
Okay. Thank you all for following along in that worksheet and going through this with me. So if that is what I've learned about the definitions, about the background, let's go into the second part. About, okay, so that's what it is. What does it mean through? And remember what I said before about the jaw, the shoulders, the breathing in the stomach. Sometimes this is when it comes up because the last part might feel a little definitional, academic. We read it in a book. This next part is a little bit more about saying, oh, that's also me. That's also my organization. So I have a couple stories here to start to help you mull over when you or your org may have an enacted trashness. The first one is one I witnessed. I was in the middle of, and I call it, "Hey camp, you're trash." So we often bring many emerging leaders, mostly in their 20s, into the woods to camp, to stay in cabins, to do leadership development activities. Many of you may be familiar with that kind of initial orientation type of activity. And unfortunately, not so much this year with the pandemic, but traditionally. And one place that we were really attracted to, that we had contracted with, all welcome. In fact, all leaders welcome. Prior to us showing up, we called ahead to check on accessibility. I did have one direct report who was someone who used a wheelchair. And while we trust people generally, when they say yes, everyone's welcome, sometimes we have to do our due diligence just to make sure that people are truly welcome, that they're not just invited, but that when they arrive, they'll actually be welcome and belonging. And the place said, yes, we're fully accessible. And once we got to the camp, we were about to go into the first room for orientation. And there were steps up into the orientation room. There was no ramp for the entire building. And we said, oh, well, we're going to have to move the orientation to a different building. Maybe you didn't get the message, you particularly, but the camp did. And not every space, of course, necessarily would have been addressed. But they said, oh, no. Some of his friends can just lift him up over the threshold, up the steps. This is not going to happen. It's not okay. Invite people to a place. They arrive, your house isn't ready for them. Like that's not inclusion. That's diversity. In fact, diversity is often on the invitation side of things, and inclusion is on the making sure people belong and are welcome once they arrive. And so we said, hey camp, you're trash. So that's one story, just to illustrate when our staff said that about a place, and then we proceeded to fire that vendor, and because they refused to change, and we're very proud of the fact that they weren't required by law based on the length of time with their camp to be fully accessible. My second story about admitting something is true and working with people who did admit or not admit, this one's a little more on the admitting side. I call, hey church, you're trash. So the church I go to, Unitarian Universalist, if anyone's familiar with that particular religion / denomination, one particular church location I really believed that respect meant being quiet. So you went into church, everyone kind of shushed everyone to the music, or you did this thing, and throughout the entire service, it was very meditative. And then at one point they would ring a gong, which would make everyone even more quiet and meditative. I'm meditative. I like that kind of quiet. But they did believe that this was a universal value. So therefore, because they thought it was universal and because they valued it, they thought they were acting neutral or universal when their outreach to get more non-white people, and in this case, Black people, to attend the church, someone did come in, they thought they were acting universal and neutral when they shushed the person every time the person exclaimed in agreement. Because that person was from a background where if they were agreeing with something, they would say, hallelujah or amen or whatever it might be in the church space. A couple weeks later, one of the pastors got up and said, we're so concerned that we're trying to be inclusive and we're trying to invite people. And of course, being quiet is okay in itself. There's nothing wrong with meditation, but used about why your diversification efforts are not going very well. And it's because when something different showed up, you immediately wanted that person to become you. You weren't welcoming of who the person was. You were interested in diversity again. You weren't very interested in belonging and inclusion. And so he didn't say, hey church, you're trash, but that's my title for that particular short story. Here's a silent reflection. This is worksheets 3C, if you're following along on the worksheet. And if you would like to, you can do this mentally or physically. These are some more obvious examples. And you might want to check mark ways you or your org enacts trashness. And you might notice in this section of admitting things, it's a lot of practice. It's some different tools, it's sharing of stories, and it sometimes is a reflection like this. And these are real things I have heard. So for some people, these might sound a little funny, but these are actually I have heard in my time. Obvious. The next slide we'll get to a little less obvious. So thank you for being so polite. Could you train other Black people to be that way? Have you ever heard that, or have you ever done that? You're non-binary? Wow, what's that like? I know you're gay, but you act so straight. You're smart for a teenager. Wow, I didn't know First Peoples cared about the community. You're so with it for an elder. So think about if those are any things that you've heard, if those are any indicators of there being any sort of trashness, in your life, in your organization. Next chart, 3D, just after that one. These are less obvious examples. And also all things I have heard and witnessed. Dress more professionally next time, like me. Include 3 staff references. No children allowed. Must make a donation. Help us fix this broken. And I call these a little less obvious because oftentimes when we're thinking about things around inclusion, how we want to be inviting people and also making sure they're welcome, I hear people focusing on the obvious. I hear people focusing on, well, we don't attack people. We don't call people names, but there still are insidious ways that certain groups are preferenced. Again, if we go back to that definition, at least the translation I'm working with, are there things that are preferencing one group so the other group is going to say you're trash? And these are definitely things I have heard throughout that time. Now, sometimes people will say, okay, thanks for the stories, thanks for the quick reflection, internal. Can you just go into a little bit more detail? What do people talk about behind the scenes when no one else is listening? So this is a popular conversation I have been involved in. This is the kind of conversation I've heard people say before I went to college, or why didn't I learn that, at a younger point in my life? So this is, hey, volunteerism, to take it at, the whole topic that we're also concerned about at the large level. Hey, volunteerism, you're trash. So first question, in the US, who was volunteering traditionally for? I think we forget to ask that question. The answer I have here is, the advent of white women working out of the house in the 19th century is a hugely important part of women's liberation. If you've ever studied women's liberation, feminist movements, there's different waves. There were different people preferenced at different points. Something that happened then, though, right then when it started, the odd tradition of the white cis women perspective with white cis men's counsel became the default for what was best for communities. And we've had a really hard time historically getting out of that because it was first. It happened, but it also was first. And then we say, who is volunteering for now? Volunteering is often designed for segments of the population who may afford to earmark helping, quote unquote, the needy for special unpaid times. So if you think about it, volunteering is often designed for and preference for people who can afford not to get paid to do stuff. And who also generally think of those things as special things to do, and also generally think of the needy as people who aren't volunteering. It is often considered volunteering, that is, real if volunteering is certified to be so. So if someone every day did something, well, that's not volunteering. But this thing I signed up for because I'm able to do it, because I'm being so generous, that's volunteering because I got a certificate and it says it was volunteering. And what are some of volunteering's general designs? Well, a well-meaning group of people pick a project that they believe will help those they've deemed to be in need. Those who have been named that are not seen as potential volunteers, they're expected to conform to the proper ways of volunteering. So this is an attempt to give you some insights to, after someone has said you're trash and the people agree with that person and they kind of go away and then they think about it. This is the kind of information or insights I believe that you're not getting generally if you hear a phrase like that, or if you don't understand why people aren't interested. They're both hyper aware of historical significance going back 100+ years. And they're also very aware of current practice and can see things as well. And then they discuss those things too. Some other things to think about when we're thinking about admitting, in addition to the above conversation starters, so there's a bit of a trick in the admitting session, right? These are all tools or all practices that you could use if you were interested in working with yourself or others to think about what it means to admit. To create a sense of shared admittance, these are 3 group discussion or gap analysis questions. I'm a pretty big fan of gap analysis that first starts with celebrating where are you, and then honestly talking about what is the difference between where you are and where you would like to be, or where you could be, where you were supposed to be, etc. First question, do you have a culture or practice of even discussing that trashness exists? Is that something that you're welcome to even discuss, the fact that it might be true? 2, do you have a culture or practice of addressing the fact that trashness could be going on? And I'm not very concerned right now about the term trash, whether or not that's happening. I mean the conceptualness of what we're talking about today. And then thirdly, do you have a culture or practice of you're welcome here despite who you are, or you're welcome here because of who you are? And that third one, I have heard at the crux of so many people hurt by volunteerism, so many people hurt by community organizations. because the true, and a second one should be true. People, you're welcome despite who you are. Going back to the camp example, you're welcome despite the fact that you use a wheelchair. You're welcome here because of your whole self. And what does that mean? Not for you to be different. What does that mean for us to be different, the people doing the invitation? And I do want to say this is not easy work. And I often reference that jaw, shoulders, and breathing, because some of what may arrive with realization, and I've witnessed this, so you have to know your pace, you have to know your people. People and organizations can become forlorn, but they also can get a lot of hope. They can become exhausted. And then there might be the one person who does a lot of dramatic questioning of everything, because once you realize something, oh no, we have to question everything. Some people might want to go too fast. We have to act now. Some people might want to go too slow, and they cycle in awareness. You know, you end up with 4,000 giant sticky notes on the wall, those really big Post-its about ideas and admittance, and you never actually get to action. What may happen is you start preferencing awareness, and then awareness becomes your outcome. You never get to the third part, which we're not to yet today. You stop at acknowledging something as true and then moving on, which is not the goal. You might start hiding behind phrases. We saw that this summer where companies hired many amazing marketing directors and people to do branding, that they were supporting Black lives. But we also saw people in those companies say, that's great that you're admitting it, but now can we hold you to what you're saying? That's only a first step to be aware. And otherwise, then you get dilution of effect, or even thinking that you did something. You can get pushback, of course. You can be forgetting that people and learned behavior make up the culture of an organization. So it really, you know, sometimes we think of culture as this nebulous thing, but it really is the people and behavior of what's there, the expectations. And it likes to hide sometimes, but it really is about the questions and whether or not, you know, talking and addressing is allowed. People might become brave. They might start pointing things out, and they might start asking for change, and there may be conflict as well. So I never want to say, okay, know what being trash is, admit it's true, and then that's the end of it. You know, at this point, you might get through admitting stuff is true and really get to a place where it's difficult to move into our third section, because of the emotions, because people aren't unclenching their jaw, you know, lowering their shoulders and breathing. That, you know, in change management, one thing that people try to do is hold on to stability. As humans, it's difficult for us. It's difficult for us to change. And I see a couple comments, I believe, popping up. So again, between sections, I'm going to pause quickly, go to Billy or another staffer just to see if there's anything to address in the chat.
Yeah, we had Nicole had shared that she can agree with this because her example would be language barriers. Her first language is Spanish, and sometimes she doesn't understand unless the person speaks clearly and slowly. We also had, Marcia had asked if you could expand on your definition of affirm.
Yeah, that's great. I'll keep that one in mind right now. Are there other ones too to address?
That was the only other question.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, that word affirm, and I think that's going to come up a little in this next section too, through some more examples of what to do. By affirm, I was messing with the word promote when I was writing the definition too, and they're almost interchangeable for me here. And the reason I think I chose affirm when writing this is affirm sort of allows for, I think, a bit of subconscious and conscious approval of something and preference for something. Promote seems to be a verb that feels a lot more active. But if you think of affirm as promoting without knowing or with knowing, I hope that helps you get a little sense of what I meant by using that word. And feel free to write in the chat if that was helpful or if you have a follow-up question too. Thanks for pointing those out, Billy. Okay, part 3. So the question I've often heard is, so what can we do specifically, tools wanted? If you've been in any session like this in the past, or if you've gone through anything that feels at first, okay, that feels a little academic. Okay, now we're going through, you know, the retreat portion is kind of what we just did. But what do we do once we get back home? You know, other than the initial parts of this, parts 1 and 2. So I'm going to give you some real tools and practices I hope you find valuable to pick and choose from. Some of them I do suggest thinking about them in the terms of locations, which may be a very creative writing word from my background, but I think of locations not as physical locations, but as the locations of thought, if you will, so that there's 3 locations I'll reference: internal or the self, location with those that are calling you or your organization trash. You're trying to invite them, but they're, and with your team and organization. So at that change management organizational level too. And it may be challenging for your org if you're thinking about how to apply any of this to start at internal self. You may not have the culture of self-reflection, of self-critical reflection. You can adjust the internal self ones to be part of facilitated prep for team org. Think about the concepts here, and I always err on the side of what is working for the organization, and the tools are drafts and templates that we can talk about as needed, how they could be used in a different way, or you can brainstorm on that with your team too. So we're at worksheet 4B, and this first practice is, I call adjusted dialogue. And this is, again, if you see the different locations, the first column is internal invited, and the third column is that change management sort of team organization. We have dialogues, is the theory I'm working off of, and we practice the trashness that we have. We're either affirming it, to use that word again, or we're checking on it. And if we didn't have assumed things that we just have inside of ourselves, we would never be able to function. And my favorite example is always a chair. If you sat down in a chair today, you probably did not check if that chair was going to hold you up. You just sat in that chair. You know, some things are really good assumptions and really good shorthands that we have in life. And other times we do need to check on those kinds of things. And so I call this adjusted dialogue. One of them, an example focus of an adjusted dialogue internally would be, what is your lifelong job? And I don't mean the specific job title you have. I mean, in this topic of work, what is your job? And the thing I suggest using here is admit that organizations and methods we create, promote, are often built, most traditionally been empowered. So that could be a journaling activity where that's just put on the board and that's discussed, or people journal about that. With those invited, a focus is believing the intelligence people bring you. They may experience what you can never verify. And wow, if there is something that really, I'm trying to use a nonviolent metaphor, really opened some insights for me, shined a light at me, it was really this idea that I'm such, you know, my current role is a lot of compliance. I do a lot of grant writing. I meet with foundations. You know, I'm making sure the numbers and the stories are on. If I'm teaching, I'm making sure that I can go back to my notes. And sometimes I don't have the experience of the person who called me trash or called my organization trash. I never will. I'm not of that group. I can't understand it. And so this focus of believing the intelligence people bring you, naming it as data, you know, and valuable data. And I suggest, I'm sorry you feel that way. I didn't mean to. Are you sure that's what happened? You know, recognizing if those things are happening in your organization, and instead using, thank you, tell me more if you'd like. Or what does it mean to fully invite someone? What considerations help people say yes? Is it childcare? Would that change our story of volunteerism? So again, this could be a conversation you're having about and with those invited. And then at the team org level, the focus suggested here is the fullness of people, suggested to avoid, but it's tradition, as the answer to why change can't happen, or to acknowledge that tradition is important and all traditions emerge from somewhere and progress to another place. And instead, create a dedication as a team, something to go back to. Think of those marketing slogans. If you're so bold to put one out in the world, be so bold to be held to it within your organization. Because we believe XX, whatever that might be, members of our team are encouraged to ask practices and put that up and have that be something people can go back to. When I taught in the college classroom, it was so important that my students could trust everything I said the first day, whatever I had on my syllabus. And I know there's always the joke of the professor or the teacher saying, oh, it's on the syllabus. But it was about creating an agreement, not about what I was telling them was true. It was about making sure that we had different roles, that there was different understandings of what was about to happen, that by taking a class, they were agreeing to something. And I'm a big fan of being very obvious in the workplace about what the agreement is, and writing it out and practicing it. You always have something to go back to. When someone says, well, why are you pointing that out? You can say, remember that dedication we wrote together. Another practice is analysis. So first one was sort of on the discussion, easy things to do, perhaps in meetings, in one-on-ones with community members, in journaling assignments for staff. With this one, this level, with the internal self, perhaps a journaling assignment. What is the purpose of community service? Have I been doing community service for my whole life because I think I'm trying to fix people? And ask yourself, do I try to fix people when they find ways to talk to me? There's lots of questions that could work for this. Or am I listening to people? Am I facilitating people's expertise? Or am I trying to take what they have and use it as a tool to fix them? What is my internal purpose? What do I carry with me as my beliefs about community service? I have to do some analysis here. With those invited, focusing on the qualifications and metrics of volunteerism, and this helps you avoid, they don't meet the requirements. I don't know how many times I have met with groups and I say, why don't more people from the community you're trying to serve volunteer with you? And the answer is, they don't meet the requirements. And if you got any verve from this presentation, my answer might be your requirements. Or you might have to look at, what it to even be a volunteer. What are you protecting? What are you affirming by saying they don't meet the requirements? And instead, you may want to use an adjusted position description created based on the talents of those you're inviting. So that can be hard for people, but not knowing what you're doing, people show up. Perhaps using new locations of recruitment ads and tables. I don't know how many times I've met with other AmeriCorps organizations, for example, who said, we really wish we had more diversity in our core. And then they showed me where they advertise and where they have their recruitment tables. And I say, well, you might be getting the people you're talking to. What does it mean to change that? What does it mean to relocate? In this case, location is actual physically different locations. And you may want to use new metrics for volunteering, especially if you're trying to do a business case for why it's important to change. Grant, foundations love this, CEOs love this, C-suite, add metrics to your volunteering. Our just help clean up a neighborhood, but the way we're redesigning that cleanup is that those who volunteer will receive resume points or other items achieved. And it switches the fact that you're not just serving, to use that terminology, the neighborhood, but the people who are doing the volunteering themselves are also being served. And that can switch the opportunity to be the questions of not they're not qualified, but through this experience, they will become qualified. And what does it mean to really alter your metrics? How amazing to write to a foundation to say, we didn't just do volunteering. We trained 17 community members in CPR and then did a CPR volunteering day. I mean, that you know, can just blow your mind by being more open about who's allowed to be with you. Not just who you invite, but who you welcome. And then on the team org level, who we believe should be making decisions. I think important conversations. I suggest, is our organization qualified to be with a volunteer is much more important than is a volunteer qualified to be with our organization. And I think that can go back to the last slide with dedications. I think this can be a great reflection question at any time. I really, really think organizations need to ask themselves, are you qualified to be with volunteers much more often than the other way around? One thing you could do is hold your meetings in the neighborhood that is the recipient of your volunteerism. I don't know how many times all the planning has happened in one zip code, and then the quote unquote needy zip code is where the volunteering occurs. I mean, distancing the planning is distancing the power on purpose, even if you don't know you're doing it. And then I also suggest something called assessment with the power ladder, which I'm going to go into on the next slide here. I used to work a lot with the ABCD Institute out of Northwestern University. And so I'm not sure, I cannot track it from me, was in their books, but this a lot. We did hundreds and hundreds of trainings together around the country. And this was one of the most powerful tools I've ever seen, to sit down with people and have them admit what may be going on when you're talking about involvement and what it means to invite the community, in this case, the community that might be calling your trash. So there's 4 rungs in this. Again, we're on worksheet 4C if you're following along there. And it's the second part of 4C, so you might have to scroll down to the next page. And the 4 rungs at the very top, in charge. The next step down, influencer or actor. The next step down, survey taker. And the final, recipient only. I know I've changed the names of these rungs over the years, so if you're used to this tool with other names, that's very possible. And then the question and the way to fill this in, consider the community that is, or people who are, supposed to be the primary beneficiary of a service. So, you know, just think about that. When you're thinking about a volunteer project, when you're thinking or community service in general. Now, you've named those people. What level are they at on this power ladder? And the theory goes from the ABCD Institute and others is they bet you that they're probably on the bottom rung. They're probably recipient only. And then maybe they've gone up to survey taker because maybe you ask them some of their preferences for what might go on during the day. Overall, then fill in what types of people are on each level. And then finally, when you have that filled in, what would it take to have the community or people benefiting be more in charge? What does it mean to invite people, not assign people, but invite people up this power ladder? And then we can go back to that slide about things that can happen when you start being aware and start trying to make change. There can be fights. Oh, but it's tradition, but this is so important for me. We're not talking about kicking people out of volunteering. We're talking about creating a space that people aren't just invited, but everyone belongs and is welcome. That's really difficult work. And as many people have said, if we knew how to do it, we wouldn't be together today, you know, talking about it if there was some sort of perfect answer. It really does happen individually, organizational level, and then we do start learning together in these ways too. And then finally in this section, the practice here, which is on 4D, is the ways you think about gratitude and ways to change. So again, those 3 levels. Level, you know, the focus here, the suggested focus is believing and being thankful. And the reflection is, when are you thankful internally? How often do you express that thankfulness externally? If you're like me, you are very thankful internally, and then you do a favor for someone as an external thank you, but you sometimes forget to say it out loud. What have you gotten used to expecting and aren't consciously thankful for? Are you Are you used to your direct reports doing such a good job that you don't think they deserve a thank you? You know, what does that mean? What does that mean to them? What does that mean to your volunteers? So just what's your relationship with thankfulness as a good place to start? Once you've done that, with those invited, suggest it focus here is being specific about gratitude. You may have heard this before, but just saying thank you is not as powerful as thank you for contributing your talent in XX and completing YY. So being very specific to people so that they know. This is even easier if you changed your metrics of volunteering and added some ways that you would be looking for that volunteering to be successful on multiple levels. And then finally on the team org level, gratitude by focusing on the local economy. I don't know how many times I have heard a community organization or nonprofit say, we're community focused, we love our community, we're into economic empowerment, we're at the Main Street America conference, and then their thank yous are gift cards to large national online vendors who suck the money out of local communities and send it off to a billionaire somewhere. Please look at the way you interact with vendors. It is not that hard to become more local. It just takes a little research to discover ways to, if you're going to get a lunch and you're focused in a Black community, to hire a Black restaurant owner to have that lunch, whatever it might be. So be community centric, ensure your food, gift card, printing, etc. vendors are local, especially to the recipient community, that the communities that you're supporting, that you're helping, that you're doing volunteering in, that's also part of the problem. You know, they are not wastelands. These are amazing places where the community lives. And there are amazing things in all communities. We're just so used to calling them the bad places, the needy places. And I really think a technical adjustment, like where your vendors come from and where they live and who they are, can really help your staff, and you adjust the sense of gratitude and that practice within your organization. So I have a first closing thought. These are examples of not working on trashness. So in case these are things you thought, okay, these are things I'm gonna go do, I'm gonna say, please don't. First one, let's put together a panel for Black History Month on how Rosa Parks had so much bravery to work alone and on her own, take that risk to sit on the bus, and how no way was there an organized movement she was working with. So don't do that, because that's not true. That's like the mythological Rosa Parks. The second thing not to do, let's get clip art for diversity and volunteering ads. And then when we interview people, tell them everyone but one, they are qualified, but just aren't good. The one, after a few months, let's tell them they're doing a good job in the boat less and getting along better in the definitely neutral organization culture. So don't do that, please. Don't force someone to assimilate and just pick one person you're going to force to assimilate. And thirdly, don't do this either. Let's form a new advisory council on poverty for the city and make it a requirement that each member donates $10,000 from their company. Please don't do that. I'm not saying board members and supporters can't donate money, but you have immediately left out those in poverty from your advisory council by doing that. So some more closing thoughts, 4 more. People are not selfish for wanting to be treated well, to have their dignity honored. Volunteerism writ large is made for certain people. I fully believe that. How have you or how has your org been affirming the traditionally empowered? That is such an important question to be asking, and bringing this up. If you don't bring this up, I'm not sure how you will get to action. A third one, you can never get to neutral. You know, there is no neutral. You and your org will participate in trashness, depending on who you are and when, but you can be, and you can work against it, and people will notice, and you can get better at not just inviting people, but making sure people are included and belong once they arrive. And you have to take care of yourself too. This can't just be, as we like to do in nonprofit and community work, running ourselves ragged. Some 3 additional resources or giving credit thoughts here. I'm with Public Allies by my day job, so you can ask an emerging leader to apply to be an ally at apply.publicallies.org. In this geographic part of the country, we have a Chicago area office and then our southeastern Wisconsin office based out of Milwaukee that's also doing work in Racine and Kenosha. So if you know an organization who would like to host an ally, please do let us know. Someone I have watched many videos of, if you like this kind of topic and you want to watch some videos to help you think or your staff think, Francesca Ramsey Decoded are great free videos on YouTube to look up. And if you don't, and just to get started on that local vendor stuff, if you wish there was a tool, I wish there was learn where to buy my books from locally, we'll go to indiebound.org and they have a database of all the independent bookstores, or many of them. I want to remind you what we did. We acknowledge that the topic may lead to, remember, those teeth, the shoulders, the breath. So always make that space, drop your shoulders and breathe. We talked a bit about what I've learned your trash means. I shared that. We went into what it means to admit it's true. And then we got to what someone might do about it all. We went through some different tools, some analysis, some conversations, some different actions for how change could happen and what could be the change. I really want to thank you for attending this session. I want to thank again all those who supported it. And I'm going to head back to Billy now for any thoughts or questions we might have coming up in the chat.
Thanks so much, Todd. That was great. We had a couple comments in the chat. Renee had shared that the power ladder was awesome. And she said, thank you, make sure that your volunteer positions have potential for growth in administration of the volunteer program. And then having a strategic business plan with goals for volunteering was something that she felt was important. And we had a couple other comments. And someone else had just shared some thank you comments with us.
Okay, great, excellent, thank you. I'm going to stop sharing and just go back to the general room for any other questions or Q&A that people might want to have live here. I think we have about, I think I left about 9 minutes or so. I can't remember the exact time. But.
Yep. Yeah, 7 minutes left.
I would love to hear reflections. They don't have to be questions either. And I always say, fumble out loud. Don't wait to be perfect. If you have something on your mind, fumble through it because we'd all love to hear it.
The piece that sat with me the most, that I plan to spend a lot of time with following this presentation, is thinking around is an organization qualified to be with volunteers, and not just looking at is somebody qualified to volunteer for you.
Great, thank you.
I think you made a really powerful comment when you mentioned the distance of planning versus the location of the activity, and how that alone can exclude individuals who want to participate. I thought that was something I definitely highlighted and was very thought-provoking.
Excellent, thank you for sharing that. And there is a question in the chat, or more of a musing. I'm curious about the word ally. I'd assume there's an enemy, allies versus access. So I've chosen partner instead. Any thoughts? I love when people talk about the word ally. I have a couple thoughts on that. One, we use it internally at Public Allies to mean someone who has decided to dedicate themselves to learning what it means to be invited to be an ally. That it's not a term you get to adopt for yourself. So if you're straight and you're trying to be an ally to the queer community gets to invite you to be one. You don't get to say you are one, for example. If you're white, you don't get to just say you're a Black ally. The Black community gets to invite that. Because we have expertise of the communities who are affected by the topics. I also love when language is different and used best geographically. I always go back to the price of milk. 30 years ago, I believe it was, they tried to make the price of milk the same in the entire country, and milk sales plummeted in some places and went up in others. It's one of those things that you need to do certain things geographically. I think that's very true right now for pronouns. Wisconsin has he, she, they. If you go out to California, there are pronouns I've never heard of in use when I've been out there, and I've had to learn for people. So there are geographic things going on all the time with language. And then the other thing I would say about that is it's so important within the question, and this is something I would talk about if I was teaching an English class right now, to look at where meaning comes from when we're writing and when we're speaking. Meaning does not come from the writer. Meaning is created between the writer, the reader, and society, and what society holds inclusive of words. And though that's where meaning, that's where discussion comes from. So if I assign a paper to a student, it's never what happened in the story. It's what did it mean for this to happen in the story? What did it mean to you? What did it mean to the reader? What did it mean in society? And what's your conclusion? At the center of all those things. And so I think the question from Harlan also highlights that if you don't allow for discussion about language, about people's experiences, it can be very difficult to leave having talked about the same thing. At the same time, there will be times when people use language in a way to shut other people down. I don't know how many times I've seen Black women shut down by saying, well, you can't talk until you're not angry. It's like, well, I don't know if that person's angry. That person just might be confident right now and you're not used to it. But two, that person might have a right to be angry. And why are you promoting a false neutrality of non-anger? What does that mean? And perhaps you do. And that if someone raises their voice, you know, that you'll discuss that. Maybe that is part of your culture or something. But, you know, I'm not trying to equivocate as much as I'm trying to pay attention. When you're trying to include everyone, I think it's a great example of how we're not used to. We're just not used to doing it. We're so used to inviting everyone to a table and then expecting them all to act like a straight person or like a white person or whatever it might be. And part of this topic, it's really hard. That was part two. Part of this topic is admitting it, and that is difficult work.
Yeah, great points. Thank you so much, Todd. We are going to move into the discussion portion of the session this morning. If you need a moment to use the restroom, refill your coffee or tea or water or stretch, please do that.
And if we could just take a couple minutes and thank Todd, give him a round of applause. Thank you so much. Excellent job, Todd. Excellent job.
Thank you so much. It was really fun. And I'm sticking around for the discussion part. So if people have thoughts or anything, I'll be here until that ends as well.
Oh, good. Thanks, Todd.
And thank you for the comments and the notes. I see them coming in. I'm glad the examples were helpful. I really wanted to push this beyond some academic concept into some specifics.
Todd, I also wanted to say that I really like the power ladder. So often in our work, we talk about making sure that we engage people with lived experience. And to me, that might be the survey taking piece. And then we talk about, but also then co-creating with community as a best practice. But I love the next piece, in charge, right? So it's not just making sure that people are a part of the table and it is our table and they're welcome to the table, but also that they have, you provide the leadership, the opportunity to go to the next step, which is in charge. I hadn't seen this specific tool. Love it. Yeah, love it.
Great, thank Yeah, thank you. Thank you for that. And speaking of the table, someone told me this once, and then once you invite people to be in charge, they might get rid of your table. And you have to be okay with it.
That's right. That's right. Yeah, we just had John Powell was with our community recently, and he talks about othering versus belonging, and talked about having a party and to think about it. So you might invite someone to your party, but it's your party, it's your music, it's your food, right? So rather than bringing everyone, making sure that it's everyone's party and that everyone decides food, everyone decides music, and so that there's this true sense of belonging and ownership, right? Yeah.
Pam, I recently just saw the agenda for Habitat on the Hill. So every February, Habitat affiliates from across the country descend on Washington, D.C. for Lobby Day, which, isn't all Lobby Day, but we do 2 days of training, and then, we spend a day on the Hill meeting with as many Congress people as we can. And you know who the keynote is? John Powell.
Oh, that's awesome.
Isn't that cool? I was like, I know him. Like, that's so crazy. Yeah, I was like, we brought him to Rockford, and now like our organization internationally is bringing him to our like full-on advocacy training, which I thought was like really amazing.
Very cool.
Yeah, I mean, he's up there with like, I mean, a couple years ago we had Matthew Desmond, the author of Evicted. Richard Rothstein, the author of The Color of Law. So like really heavy hitters. And this year, our efforts are surrounded around diversity or belonging. And so John Powell is our keynote. I'm super excited about it.
Love it. Yeah.
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 And he came to Rockford first.
Yeah. So like, he's so easy. He's so easy. Like Richard Rothstein, most people probably don't know what The Color of Law is, but it's a historical perspective on housing discrimination, which clearly matters to Habitat people, right? It's a really hard read. In fact, I tried to read the book and then downloaded the audiobook because I was like, I am not smart enough for this. And then I really even struggled with the audio version. He's like so smart. But yeah, listening to John Powell is easy.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
It's so easy to understand him. Yeah.
He has a book. His most recent book is very academic, but he does refer to himself as a pracademic.
That's cool. Yeah. All right, Billy, are we good? Yes. We've taken a 5-minute coffee break. So welcome everyone. Martija and I are excited to facilitate a really cool conversation. Todd, thank you. I was really excited about yours ever since we got your proposal, a while ago. I was like, okay, I'm really interested to see how this conversation works. So let me first start by saying, I appreciate that you framed this from your own personal framework, right? That you're like, this is what your trash means to me. This is how I've seen it. This is how I've heard it. As opposed to, this is exactly what the definition is. And so, right, that gives us an opportunity from the very first moment of conversation to say, well, this is how I've experienced it. This is what I've heard. And you know what, I think Martija and I both, when we were looking at that list of things that we've said to people, right? Or the things that you've heard or people, have said, examples, some of the examples about, the meeting space not being accessible for people with disabilities. I run a Habitat for Humanity affiliate, and we had a volunteer come to us once who was in a wheelchair. And that is borderline impossible. And so we did not handle that situation well. And so I appreciate that you came at it from like, this is my perspective, because that gives us an opportunity to then take our real life examples and kind of fit that in. So thank you for really insightful information. You're right, my jaw clenched a couple times. I took a couple deep breaths. I did have to relax my shoulders a couple times because you said a few things that resonated with me as a leader of an organization whose volunteers all look exactly the same. And so I appreciate the honesty. That's what this whole series is about, right? You don't make change unless you're uncomfortable. And we all kind of live in a comfortable, you know, in our own comfort levels, in our own organizations. And it's nice sometimes to reflect on what we don't do so well.
Absolutely.
So let me kick off. Go ahead, Martija.
I couldn't agree more, Todd. I can tell you I have about 3 pages of notes of just
Yeah.
quotes that you said, and I'm like, oh, these are some zingers, and that's a good thing for me. Those are zingers. Those are things that are going to stick in my head and that I'm going to be able to share with others. So just very, very insightful, informative. I really appreciate the format as well. I love the title. I will tell you that. So this was a really, really great session.
So that's our question to you, friends. What was your zinger? What's your aha moment? What's the thing you wrote down? What's the thing you put a star next to that you underlined? What's the thing that like stood out to you the most? In the Habitat world, we call that your aha moment. Martija calls it a zinger. Tell me what they are. Let me hear them.
Well, for me, it's the idea of like admitting something's wrong and then stopping your efforts entirely and like considering that the finish line as opposed to like that being the first step of actually doing things. I think, like, thinking even back immediately to the Black Lives Matter thing, I think it's easy for people to like put a bumper sticker on or put something on their website, like a statement of intent, and then say, all right, we've done our work and we're not actually going to make any sacrifices or cause any change, or just we're done with this now.
That's a great point, Matt. Yeah.
Yeah, Matt, I couldn't agree more. I think that was also one of the zingers that I had written down, is just going beyond that Black Lives Matter statement. What are you doing to actually create change? What's the next step in the process? Any other zingers?
Yeah, I see you. Hey, Beth.
I like the power ladder. You
Yeah.
know, so many times we make the decisions and we go, okay, this is what we're doing for you. But we don't listen to the people who are the recipients and what do they actually need? What do they want? And we need to move them up the power ladder.
Yeah. Does anybody, there's a couple of comments in chat, I'll get to them too. Was anybody familiar with ABCD? Yeah. Pam, do you remember a couple of years ago, Brad Roos brought somebody in from the Asset-Based Community Development Corporation in Chicago?
Yep, that was through NICNY. Yep.
It was through NICNY, yes. I remember seeing the power ladder then, Todd, and remembering that idea that recipients of your organization can also be decision makers.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I really, what a powerful process. So Marcia said, you're welcome here because of who you are, not despite who you are. The chair will support you when you sit down. I also thought that was a really like insightful statement, right? Because I sit down, well, I sit a lot, but like, I just trust that it's going to be there. Yeah. And so like that, I think that's a really, great way to kind of, put that into context. Jennifer says the idea that diversity is the invitation and inclusion is being welcome. Right? Yes. Like such an we've had so many conversations about diversity and so many different definitions of diversity. And these conversations are happening all over our community. But this team, this is our 4th time together. Right? We talk about diversity, and this is the first time we've heard that the idea that diversity is the invitation to the table and that inclusion and belonging is being welcome at that table. Like those are 2 totally different things. Like, can't just have a token, right? Like you have to be inclusive.
Yeah, that's a great statement, Carrie. And I think we've talked about that before. If you have that token individual and they do not feel welcome, they will not stay there. They will not stay there. So you have to make sure. I love that. I wrote that. I highlight that quote again about the chair will support you when you sit. That's a powerful statement. That's a powerful statement.
Yeah. Christina said, I also thought the use of local vendors and vendors in the neighborhood close to the event is a great idea. Me too. We buy a lot of lumber and things from Home Depot. And so I literally in my side notes wrote HD question mark. Right.
Carrie, I wanted to add just one little piece to that because that is a very good comment. As you guys are putting together your plans on welcoming diversity, please make sure you incorporate small businesses, especially from the minority community. I mean, to drive past all of the small businesses and maybe go to a Panera Bread, even though I love it, you know, go to a Panera Bread for lunch. There may be a local entrepreneur within that neighborhood that you can support. And so it may not be directly aligned with your volunteerism, but I think it's very important to incorporate that. That was another great point, Todd.
Yeah. Catherine says, becoming aware is important and hard. Boy, isn't that the truth. But important to know, it is not an end in itself. Need to work on what comes next, needed changes and actions. Yeah, agreed. Todd, you know what's really interesting is that we ask this question as kind of the first question after every presentation. And this is the most we've gotten in diverse answers. Like so many people took so many kind of different concepts from your presentation. That's awesome.
Absolutely.
Any final ahas or zingers that anybody wants to share? Awesome.
So there was something else that I wanted to bring up and just wanted to gather some of your thoughts. And this was specifically around the whole idea of, is your organization qualified to be with a volunteer versus is a volunteer qualified to be with us? Can we do a quick show of hands? Is that something that we think we all can kind of work a little bit on? Any thoughts? What kind of feelings? What did you think about that? What kind of solutions are you thinking of?
So I don't have solutions yet, but I can say for sure. So I just started as the volunteer coordinator at my agency, and sort of was looking through what requirements are for, you know, in order to volunteer with us, and was like, whoa, we need to make some adjustment. And I had this sort of, I've been grappling with it this past week, and sort of it didn't sit well with me. And this really helped me just kind of solidify and think about more of what is so deeply problematic about having so many hurdles to be a part of our organization. And that, yes, we are in the midst of transformation and trying to, you know, work on a change team and become, you know, sort of, you know, claim anti-racism. And yet I can't imagine, you know, that anyone but those with the most privilege would be able to get through the hurdles to be a part of what we're doing. And so, yeah, it helped me think about how I can talk to leadership at my agency about why some of what we're doing needs to change.
Yeah. I think Harlan, thank you so much, Mary. Thank you.
I think that the language that we use is significant, and if we're able to utilize...
Harlan, can you turn your speaker up on your computer?
Is this better? Is this better?
No.
Still kind of faint.
Turn your volume up on your phone, bud. I think you're using your AirPods, right?
I think you're on mute.
Now you're on mute.
We may echo, I'll try it. The utilization of Marshall Rosenberg's nonviolent communication as a way of talking about this.
Harlan, I'm so sorry. I think we can't hear you.
You can't hear me?
Oh, that's better.
There you are.
Okay. The utilization of nonviolent communication as a way of talking and listening takes judging, labeling, diagnosing away, replaces it with looking at needs and feelings and requests rather than demands. It's a different way of talking, and it allows this conversation to happen. It's so easy to superimpose judgment on the things that we hear and what we were hearing today. And you were saying, take a deep breath, relax, etc., because you're going to be, the implication is you're going to be judging yourself about what you're told. And so when we're having a conversation about what we can do to change our group, this model that Rosenberg developed 50 years ago is terribly useful.
Thank you for that, Harlan.
Yeah, Harlan, this is so interesting. You bring up nonviolent communication regularly. Like, you and I have had this conversation on several occasions. Pam, maybe this is something we should talk about in terms of that Healing Illinois grant. Like, should we consider doing some training, some like regional training on not just nonprofit leaders, but small businesses, corporate leaders, government officials? Like, Harlan and I have talked about this. How many times, Harlan? 1 million. And I've done some research on it, but we should look into that. It is, I think it's still relevant. Todd,
Yeah.
have you heard of it?
Martija and Carrie,
Thank you.
if I could comment on that.
Yeah.
I have heard of nonviolent communication and the studies, a lot of it through Unitarian Universalism as well.
Yes.
They do tend to apply that quite a bit in their adult curriculums and otherwise. What I have seen in recent years is the weaponizing of nonviolent communication, ironically. So that like the misuse of it to silence other people. So an example is my mother died this year, and the family, we were in the short-term care facility where she had been up until her death. And my little brother was expressing himself, as you may, when your mother dies, in ways that are not predictable. I know him well enough to know the space he needed and what was happening. And one of the staff was so determined to use nonviolent intervention that eventually she actually touched his shoulder, which, if you know anything about someone who's going through a trauma, someone who's having a reaction to something, touch is not the best thing necessarily, especially when it's not coming from like a face-to-face. And so she had weaponized nonviolent communication to mollify a situation she was deeming inappropriate. And that's just one example. I've seen particularly against Black women, against trans Black women too, where they are, again, I did say this earlier, that they are actually participating very well in nonviolent communication, but that they're being passionate, or that they're being very highly skilled in their language, and it's so unfamiliar to those who are used to being affirmed in their leadership, that the weaponizing of that can occur. So I'm a big fan of it. I have heard of it. I just get very sad when it's weaponized.
Yeah.
I agree
We
with
need
that.
to realize. We need to realize when we're doing Jackal and not knowing it. You said she deemed inappropriate. That's not nonviolent communication in terms of her own internal process.
Yeah.
Yes, yeah, I would agree with that. And I think it is something to be very, very cautious of. I think as we're dealing with different cultures and different backgrounds, people communicate in various different fashions and may not have the tools to be able to practice that nonviolent communication techniques. And it could also be something that has been deemed, like you said, as inappropriate, maybe taken the wrong way. So I think there is a balance between the nonviolent communication and if that is something that can be weaponized. We all come from different backgrounds and we communicate in different fashions. I think about just an example, there was I worked in a previous position and there was a gentleman that was very, very angry and upset. And he didn't think that his communication was in any way, shape, or form violent. That was just that was his way of getting his point across. He was very, very passionate about what he was saying. So I think it's just it's an opportunity for us to make sure that it's not weaponized. Kind of semi along those same lines, I wanted to bring up the point that you mentioned, Todd, about how have you been affirming those who are traditionally in power? And I'm going to say that just a little bit slower so everyone can kind of share their thoughts. How have you at your organization or agency, or how have you seen other organizations or agencies affirming those that are traditionally in power? I see this quite often, so just want to throw that out. Are you guys seeing that occur? Affirming those that are in power. And maybe Todd, I can ask you, would you mind if I ask you to just kind of expand on that point?
I would love to. Thank you so much. When I was a coach within Public Allies, specifically, I'm thinking about, I had a team of 15 each year. And while we pride ourselves on being very good at the invitation and also very good at the welcoming and belonging side of things, we're also working with, say we have 45 people and there's 3 coaches, my 15 people are 4 days a week out with another supervisor, you know, in the community enacting some kind of project. And I often would have to have what I call triangle conversations between the supervisor, me, and what we call the ally about why someone's idea was not a good idea. And often would come up stories about who has good ideas, who's allowed to have good ideas. And the people who had been around the longest, maybe those who were older, those who were honestly, those who were white or lighter skinned, were often more credence or given more leeway, given more credence for ideas and more leeway for mistakes than say a Black or darker skinned person or a trans person, for example. You know, and that's just talking about an idea, if it was okay to go forward or not. I've also seen it in much more difficult conversations when, you know, the discussion of someone perhaps being removed from a program. I have witnessed white people who make a mistake are told they can learn from their mistakes. And that's not part of whiteness. Learning from mistakes is part of whiteness. I've also been told when a Black person has made a mistake that it proves how Blackness makes mistakes, and that it's a very different allowance for who gets affirmed in what kind of discussion of the same topic. So the white person would be affirmed in allowing to be remain in a position, and the Black person would just be like, see, I told you that's how Black people are. I might be being very obvious in the example, but I'm also trying to just think of an obvious example. I think other ways we affirm things is, I'll go back to the childcare example. One thing that a Unitarian church did that was great one time was admitted, oh, we don't have enough, we're not getting a lot of volunteers who are parents. I wonder why that is. And then they asked the parents, and the parents said, well, you don't offer any childcare. What are we gonna do? So then the church started offering free childcare during meetings, and then more parents came to meetings, right? So with the non-offering of childcare is affirming those who don't have children. I think it's important to think about these things as both traditional and subconscious and unconscious, and also strategic. You know, whether we're aware of them or not, they exist in a non-neutral way. They do exist to allow a certain kind of person to be affirmed, to be promoted, to retain some kind of a decision making, or even just the ability to show up. Does that, Martisha?
Absolutely, that's perfect examples. Thank you so much for that, Todd.
Martisha, I have an example too that I can share, an affiliation with a Christian school where there were 2 staff members. Both had violated the law, and the white staff member was provided grace and forgiveness, while the other person violated policy and was terminated. And that was a person of color. It happened before. So that's just an example. One of the things I wanted to toss in here for conversation too, and get perspective on, is the concept. You know, we've done some conversations around toxic charity, right? And some of the work from Bob Lupton, who talked about, and you can look at this from a volunteer perspective, the redemption of the giver versus the value to the receiver, and how folks might volunteer. I need to help those people, and they're volunteering because it makes them feel good. Can you talk about that? I'm interested in people's perspective on that and how you deal with that within your organizations.
Well, we have combated this conversation for my staff that are on. I'm not sure how many of you are on, but we've been having this conversation for years. And we've been, we have what we call house leaders. So we recruit volunteers who are skilled construction volunteers and who know how to read a blueprint and can literally build a house from the ground up. And so we have these house leaders that are volunteers for us. And we consistently, have these conversations about, the premise of our program, right, is that it's a hand up and not a handout, right? And so we build this idea of sweat equity into our program, and but still so many of our volunteers use the terms them or those people or, right, there's a lot of generalization as it relates to our home buyers who work, just for reference, 10 times harder than any of you did to get your mortgages. And by 10 times, I mean probably like 100 times harder than any of you worked to get your mortgage. And yet we still look at them as, the needy, right? The recipient that, they're only volunteering because they're required to volunteer as part of the program and not volunteering because they have the capacity to do that. And so we consistently have conversations with our house leaders in particular, because they are the people who interface with our home buyers the most, about the idea of equality, and they just don't believe it. So it's been such a hard conversation for us on so many levels, to try to get our volunteers to understand that they are just as, important on that work site. Yes, it has been, it's been a struggle for us. It's a really tough conversation that we have all the time. Anyway, yeah. It's a daily battle for us. Todd, one of the things that you said in the very beginning was that volunteering is designed for people who can afford not to get paid to do something. And that is, that I have stars next to it. I have it underlined. It's so true, right? And especially for us, right? Because we only create volunteer opportunities, especially at our construction site, on, work days. And so it's really hard to allow for, people to volunteer on our work sites if they don't come with a corporate group, or they don't, if they're working 3 jobs, right? It's impossible, for them, sometimes even hard for our home buyers to even, get to participate and complete their, sweat equity hours on their own house, because we've created, the most convenient time and place for our volunteers, as opposed to creating opportunities, for outside volunteers.
And I love to add to that point too, here, as we're looking at volunteers, volunteers often internships. And I found at various different organizations that there is limited minority representation in interns. And why do we think that occurs? That's quite often because those kids that are coming back home from college are working. And so if those are unpaid internships, they may not have the means to just be able to volunteer. And that's a perfect opportunity for your organization to consider, because that is building the next generation of future leaders, helping to move them up that chart that we discussed, helping to move them up that power ladder for the future. You can really start to invest in them at that point in time as well. But that's another thing that I've noted, internships and not having a lot of diversity there in building our future leaders.
Well, I was going to say, to sort of build off of that point, that I think one of the ways that I see sort of affirming those with power is drawing employees from your unpaid interns, and that's often the first step into our agency is your internship. And then already right there, it's the people who can afford to do 20 hours of unpaid labor for 6 months that get hired.
Yeah. Very good point, Mary.
Yeah, that's a really great point. That is like the definition of affirming the empowered right there. Yeah, yeah. So we have an interesting thought thrown out in the chat box. I've heard some debate, the difference between the organization having needed volunteer activities that help their organizational mission versus an organization that creates volunteer activities for their community and meets whatever their volunteer needs are. So two, right, kind of different philosophies around why your organization needs volunteers. Do you need volunteers to fulfill your mission, or do you create volunteer activities for the volunteers, for the community, and meet their volunteer needs? Seems like two different purposes of volunteering, to serve the volunteer or to serve the mission of the organization. Might not be mutually exclusive, but it could be. So this, right, the example that I gave could be the situation with volunteer in the wheelchair who wanted to help with Habitat's project. Should you have created a volunteer activity to accommodate them? Or is it okay that your organization had certain activities to meet its mission and not every person will be able to serve in that role? So give me your thoughts about that. Tell me how you, like, what's your gut reaction to that? Should we be creating volunteer positions that meet the volunteer needs, or are we creating volunteer positions that meet the organization's needs? And could we do both?
It's
Anybody
essential that
done
we do
both? Say it again, Harlan.
It's essential that we do both.
It's essential that we do both.
I mean, if I can, Carrie.
Yes, of course, Todd. We'd love your insight.
I would say that I have heard this question be asked before, and I have heard people say, oh, what did they say about the organization then? Oh, they're trash. Like I've heard that from people when there is a non-acknowledgement that if we bother to center the community, we're somehow no longer doing our core mission. That is actually perhaps a challenge to be addressed. That if somehow to do your core, to support the community, you have to abandon your mission, is either one, a good thing, because you're learning that your mission wasn't created by the community, and that your methodology wasn't ever connected there, and that you have been affirming outside experts, and you haven't been having bridges to the outside, but you've just been having everyone on the outside who's in the position of helping. Or there is a fundamental forgivingness that design opportunities that are designed with the community in mind have an aim at a mission. So when you think of capacity building, for example, and you believe, I'm going to use Planned Parenthood as an example. They're a recent partner of ours. Planned Parenthood wanted to make sure they were serving the entire community's health concerns. They weren't as good at serving transgender community health concerns. So they asked us, did we have allies who had trans experience? Yes. Could we place some allies with them? So we were able to design experiences that both affirmed and were created around the member, even though I'm talking about a paid person right now, but I think it's similar enough. Mm-hmm. But we're directional toward a mission, and I do think there's something about, there's something that has to be paused on when including others is somehow a special project and is not the way to get our important community work done. Like, when I see a school district say, oh, I guess we're going to have this special meeting so parents can be involved, it means parents aren't involved. Mm-hmm. And that in itself should be a gap analysis of how the school is run or how the school district is run. And I get on a technical level what someone is asking that, and I think you had a great example, Carrie, the person who uses the wheelchair. And you had a technical question too. Can everyone do every job? No, not everyone can do every job. But there's also, I find questions like that to be able to be worked out with an individual, but they're used sometimes as a distraction from overall designs of the way that we globally or systematically affirm groups of people. And I want to make sure that it is sort of a different session in a way to talk about position descriptions or individualized design, things like that.
Yep.
I think it's really important and very related, but I don't want people to get distracted by those individualized conversations, which are so important, from the admitting part of who is affirmed. Because if you dive really, really quickly into those things, as David Weaver, the founder of Public Eye Cincinnati, used to say, you haven't done your work. Your organization hasn't done the work. You're just trying to do Band-Aid things. You're just trying to. So I get the holding of things. And the other thing I want to say about it, it's messy, and in the middle of everything, someone may come to you and want to volunteer and want to be part of your organization. And the easiest thing to do is say, well, this is our mission. You know, what are your assets and how do you think it can contribute to our mission? Or this is our project today. What are your assets? And considering the truth of what's around us today, how do you think you can contribute today? And for some reason, we forget to make decisions with that person in front of us.
Yes.
Someone asks a question and then we run off to the background and have a discussion, and then we run back in and present the person with some strategic option. And I've seen it where by that point the person has left. They're like, well, I was right here. So it's a good question, but there's certain things that kind of question can reveal about the culture of an org and the readiness of an org, and other needed conversations.
Yeah. We've got a couple of comments in the chat box. Jennifer said, I think you can create volunteer roles to meet volunteer needs as long as the roles are meaningful and not busy work, right? So, right, we don't want to be in a position where we're doing mission drift, right? Where we are now all of a sudden trying to meet the needs of volunteers as opposed to meet the needs of, you know, the clients that we serve. And Marcia said, spend time in advance figuring out where you might need a volunteer. Look at those opportunities might work for a person with particular challenges or to time or access. Many times leaders are not good at delegating, which leaves people feeling outside of the in crowd. Renee says, enable the participant to say, I can or cannot assist with X skills.
Yeah, I love that, Renee. You will be surprised at the amount of baggage we all carry about what we think other people can do.
Yes.
It will surprise you. And I have a friend who uses a wheelchair, and we go on hikes all the time, and people always give me weird looks. And I'm like, because I use the word hike. I was like, you don't need to know what it means other than what you know about the word hike. Like this is not something to get too involved in right now, unless you have a friend that you've been not inviting on hikes because you didn't know what it meant. Then we can talk about it.
Not surprised on here. We have people that volunteer with a variety of abilities on here, and we do the best we can to ask the questions on here. What can you do? What supports do you need? And let the decision be made by that individual.
Yeah, agree, Renee. I think it's all about having that conversation and finding the solution with an individual. But then, as you said, Todd, after you find the solution, you really need to begin and determine what is the root cause. How do we solve the bigger problem in preventing individuals from being able to participate? I have one last little question that I just wanted to know for my personal self is, does anyone at their agency practice discussing the trashness, if that's the right way to say it, Todd, that exists? Have you discussed it? Is that something that's normal within your culture? I know that that's something that I'll be taking back to our team, is just really being willing to discuss that trashness. Do anyone practice that currently? Are you planning to?
Only when it's necessary. Only when a home buyer calls us and says, you know what so-and-so said to me today, right? Like, yeah, we only address the trash when we need to take it out.
I think, Robin, did you have a comment?
Yeah, for some reason I can't get my camera to work. So what we're getting ready to do, if you guys haven't seen it everywhere, is because of COVID, we have to open up a secondary place for people to sleep. And so we are looking for volunteers from 6 p.m. to 6 a.m. But I feel like we have a lot of hoops for them to jump through in order to do this volunteer position. But we have to consider the fact that, you know, they're going to be with people who are sleeping, so they have to be safe and that sort of thing. But we were just talking about how every time I think I have a volunteer for it, then there's some trash put on them, I guess you could say, because they don't fit the picture of what one person is imagining for the volunteers in that space. And so, I mean, I'm in the midst of it, man, right now, trying to figure out how I'm going to staff a volunteer from 6 p.m. to 6 a.m. So if you guys have any ideas, I would greatly appreciate them.
Well, Robin, I think I might have a solution to your problem, because I talked to your facility manager last week, and I think Habitat's going to build it for you.
Cool.
Yeah, I think I got you a team. So take a deep breath, unclench your jaw, rest your shoulders.
Yeah,
it'll be good. We won't be there at 6 in the morning, just so you know.
Yeah.
I was like, no, my guys don't get to work at the construction site until around 9, and then they have donuts, and then they have some coffee, and then they work. But we'll help you convert your gym. Okay, so Billy, you're welcome. So we have a guest with us today, so I want to hand it back over to Billy. So the last 15 minutes here, we can hear from our guest.
Thank you so much. And what a thoughtful discussion. These are just great sessions. I enjoy them every month. My name is Billy Callahan. I'm the Associate Director at NCNE, and it is my honor to introduce Michelle Hannikin. So let me share some information with you about her. Michelle oversees all of Serve Illinois Commission's volunteer recognition programs, their training and conferences, and their disaster services. So she's here today to share some information about their disaster services program. I do want to share that Michelle was recognized by the White House in 2013 as a champion of change in the community preparedness and resilience category, as well as by FEMA as an honorable mention as a 2012 community preparedness hero. She began her career in the governor's office in 2000 and holds both a bachelor's and master's degree in criminal justice sciences from ISU. She and her husband, Todd, and her family live in Decatur, Mount Zion area. So, Michelle, we welcome you and thank you for joining us today. And thank you so much for being a sponsor for this conference.
Absolutely. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen here in a second. And you guys are probably all wondering why I hurry up and ran away. It looked pretty funny, I'm sure. Irony, the National Weather Service decided that the test should run at 10:15. So my weather radio was going nuts. So it's a little hard to have a presentation and then the weather radio going nuts. So I thought it was kind of funny considering we're going to talk a lot about disasters, but if you don't have a weather radio in all of your volunteer sites, you absolutely should. It's used not just for impending weather, but Amber Alerts, wireless emergency alerts, such as the ones that we've been doing in COVID-19 at the state. So get one. There's my plug. Just to give you guys an idea about the Serve Illinois Commission, in case you are not familiar with our organization, we are the Governor's Commission on Volunteerism and Community Service. So what does that mean? Well, we're formalized in the Illinois General Compiled Statutes as the Illinois Commission on Volunteerism and Community Service. That acronym's not as cute, so we just go by the Serve Illinois Commission. We're actually kind of old. If you haven't heard from us, we're 41. We celebrated our 40th anniversary last year, so we were established by Governor Thompson and have continued in a variety of capacities since. So our mission is simply to increase volunteerism and community service in the state, whereby everybody recognizes their own abilities in volunteerism and they go out and do good. So just to give you a little bit idea about what's going on in Illinois now, these are the rates that we get out of the Corporation for National Community Service, also now known as AmeriCorps. They are a year old now because they come out a little bit delayed, but 2.8 million Illinoisans volunteered. So that's 28% of us. But that 28% had, 207 million hours served. So we got a small amount of people volunteering, a lot of hours. So our goal is obviously to change that if we can. But that's still, regardless, valued at $5.8 billion. So our state rate for volunteerism hourly, as defined by the independent sector, is $27.98. Most of those people volunteer in sports and hobbies and culture. I'm one of those people, followed by faith-based. I'm also one of those people. And education, yes, my kids are in high school and I can't go to their school right now, but I'm also that person. So chances are you all are super volunteers too. So just want to give you if this were any other day, I would be talking a lot about AmeriCorps. We are the State Service Commission. AmeriCorps fundings come to us from the Corporation for National Community Service, now known as AmeriCorps itself. So all of these are getting ready to change in terms of that. And we give out grants yearly. The due date for this upcoming AmeriCorps grant year was actually yesterday. So that's why I'm not going to talk a lot about AmeriCorps. Hopefully some of you were applicants. I think in the future we'll talk about it when the next cycle opens up and hopefully talk a little bit more, because we are underserved in the Rockford area, I believe. There are a few programs now in that area, but we always want that to increase. But just wanted to tell you, so if you've heard of AmeriCorps, the State Service Commission in Illinois is that organization that administers it. We're going to talk a little bit more about disaster and volunteer management today. We do have a state service plan, and one of the goals, obviously there's several, Goal 4 talks about volunteer management systems and disaster management. So I'm going to highlight that in specific today, if my mouse would show back up. So Serve Illinois is actually, just for everyone's awareness, the State Emergency Operations Plan defines different task areas that state agencies help out in. So that plan's administered by the Illinois Emergency Management Agency, and the Serve Illinois Commission is actually named the lead agency for volunteer management. So we're the primary agency that kind of takes a look at how the state responds to disasters, how we prepare, how we mitigate, and how we recover, specifically in the areas of volunteerism. So we've got plenty of help with that, but we are the lead agency. So obviously in COVID-19, that was probably 25% of my job. It's become 125% of my job, but that's okay. That's what we're here for. So I want to give you that background so you understand kind of why, we're talking about disaster preparedness and response today. So our website is the main way we communicate a lot of different volunteer opportunities. So the State Service Commission, we are a connecting organization. And what I mean by that is we don't use volunteers ourselves, but what we do is connect people who want to volunteer with the people that need them. So serve.illinois.gov is that place. So if you do not have that bookmarked, please do so. Within serve.illinois.gov, if you scroll down a little bit, we have a brand new portal that we stood up. We were planning on doing this at the beginning of the year anyway, and then COVID-19 sped this along. So we have a searchable database. If you see that Find Your Passion, click here to your community, that takes you into it. And it is powered by the vendor called Galaxy Digital. So if you were to click into that, that's what this looks like. We surveyed, so we have a state service commission here in Illinois. Every state has a state service commission except for South Dakota. I don't know why, but there was one in every state but them. And so we surveyed our peers to say, what databases are you using that are the most user-friendly, that connect into some of the local ones? And this was the one by far that we got recommended. And that is because the preponderance of local, especially United Ways, use Galaxy Digital. So there was a way for us to connect into their local portals to feed up to us. So again, we were in the process of doing this and COVID-19 happened, and then we hurry up and got going, as a matter of fact. So if you were to get to this site, you can find volunteer opportunities if you're a volunteer by clicking here. If you're an organization that needs volunteers, you can register your need here. So the one cool thing about it is this part right here where it talks about join the fight against COVID-19. Those are specific opportunities that organizations have posted that tag COVID-19. So like, let's say I'm a volunteer and I don't care about anything else. I just want to look COVID-19 opportunities. That will sort you and get you there. So that's been a really good help. As you all know, COVID-19 volunteerism has been a huge challenge because the preponderance of our volunteers, especially in the disaster world, but really all human services have been impacted by COVID-19. The preponderance of the volunteers are our retired folks who are the very people we're trying to get to stay home, especially in the beginning of part of COVID. So everyone is struggling with volunteers and no one has a magic bullet right now, but we are an avenue to help. So if you were to look on the specific COVID-19, that spot I showed you, there are different things that pop up from the organizations in there. So again, we've had this since about March. And it is on our website, and those are for general volunteer opportunities. We point also on our website to our medical volunteer opportunities, so I just want to talk to you a little bit about that. That system is called Illinois Helps at illinoishelps.net. That is a federal system that 38 states use, built on their platform, and it's a decentralized volunteer management system. Non-medical volunteers are in there too, but the preponderance of the volunteers are medical in nature. The system's not event-based, so it's basically based on a holistic approach as opposed to something specific happened. 500 healthcare organizations are in this system, so they're interested in receiving volunteers. So if you're a volunteer and you go in and you see illinoishelps.net, you're going to go in and you're going to provide all sorts of information about your background, including your contact information, what your occupation is. If you have medical credentials, those are extremely important because those also have to be verified depending on what you're doing. That volunteer can pick up to 15 of those organizations to work with. And then once their registration is completed, each of the organizations will process them and contact them. So they basically can have a lot of different opportunities the more organizations they pick to work with. So we're talking about hospitals, we're talking about local health departments, we're talking about nursing homes, we're talking about any of the healthcare organizations that you can think of that are in this system. So from an organization perspective, it's good for them because they can root through, they can check your licensure. Oh my Lord, my house phone's ringing now. I can't even believe it. Does anyone even use a house phone anymore? I apologize. It's not normally this chaotic here at my house. illinoishelps.net is that website. This is what the main landing page will look like. We have a pretty robust FAQ. We had to build it out in COVID-19 because there was an overwhelming desire for people to volunteer. The governor messaged this system as well as a couple of other places. So we have a pretty robust FAQ if you're interested in this. So I tell you all this because we need more medical volunteers, right? There are staffing shortages. There are need for them everywhere, retired or active. So if they're on here and they can connect with organizations. So staffing shortages isn't coming up. We're all going to be focusing a lot on the mass vaccination campaign. The regular flu shots are ongoing, but the COVID-19 shot, those will be available in this state for varying groups depending on, how it's segmented off, hopefully within the next few weeks. So having volunteers to help administer this is key to success. So again, if you have any medical volunteers, have them registered there. Last but not least, we started a survey in March when COVID-19 happened just to try to capture what was going on in the community. So we stood up a Survey Monkey to figure out how many volunteers, how many hours, and how many people they were helping. So no one's required to report on this, but the people that are reporting on this, it's from our website, this link is, are giving us a really good idea of what's going on out there. So I just ran the stats yesterday and you can see them here. Nearly 14,000 volunteers, 104,000 hours, which is almost $3 million in value, serving 11% of the population. So of course, we always want that to continue. We'd love more robust reporting, but I am very proud of the organizations that have been working in COVID-19. It's clearly a need that will go on well into 2021. And with that, I am happy to take any questions, Billy. Thank you so much.
Thank you. If you have questions for Michelle, please feel free to unmute your mic and ask or drop them into the chat box.
Or feel free to call me or email me later.
Perfect. And I will share her contact information out with the follow-up email for this specific session. Again, I know we shared it early on, but I'll share it with this one in case you have questions about the programs or resources that she talked about. So thank you so much, Michelle.
Thank you.
Very appreciated. It was great to have you with us this morning, and thanks again for your sponsorship.
Yes, I would echo that. Michelle, thank you for sponsoring the conference last year and then sponsoring the series. We're really thankful to have you. And Todd, I will say thank you again for a really thought-provoking conversation today. and for everyone participating in the discussion. These are always, I know it's a lot of time to spend, and I'm just really grateful that, you know, so many of you continue to come back month after month. So thanks for participating in our little project.
Yeah, thank you all. This was a lot of fun, and I wish you the best on taking care of yourselves and taking, you know, and inviting the community in this difficult work, much less in these times.
Wonderful.
Thank
Great.
you.
And happy holidays to everyone.
Yeah.
We'll see you next year.
Oh my gosh, in 2021. Woo! It'll be back to 2020.
Yeah.
That's right.
All right, happy holidays, everyone.
Happy
Yeah,
holiday.
I'm going to share a slide for the January session. If you want to grab that information before you head out, feel free to read it or head off and enjoy your day. Thanks so much.
Thank you, everyone, and happy holidays and great presentation.
Take care.
Bye.
Bye-bye.